Hello and welcome to Saturday Morning Cartoons, the weekly podcast that revisits, reviews, and ridicules some of the world's weirdest animated series. I'll be your host, Dave Trumbore. That flapping sound you hear in the background is the terror that flaps in the night, known as Sean Paul Ellis. What's going on over there, bud?
David, how are you doing?
You're making some strange noises to start the show. That's good stuff.
I'm excited.
Well, I am too. Let's get into it. And he is the jailer that throws away the key? Matt Barron, joining us from San Francisco. What's up, buddy?
I don't know how to feel about that intro, but you know what, I'll take it.
You know what? So we're obviously talking about Darkwing Duck today, and he's a character that's kind of known for his catchphrase, which was, "I am the terror that flaps in the night," and then he comes up with just some terrible follow-up that's usually like a pun on whatever the current situation is, but getting very far ahead of myself. So that'll be the show we're talking about today. We're going to switch things up just a little bit here. We're actually going to talk about what the series kind of is overall first, and then we'll delve into the history of the show because it's got a little bit more meat on it than some of the shows that we normally talk about. So, Matt, do you want to give the listeners just a little bit of a flavor of what the show's about?
Absolutely. So the show that we are talking about, Darkwing Duck, was actually produced by Disney, and it was Disney Afternoon's first series that emphasized action rather than adventure. But basically what it was Darkwing Duck was the main character who was a crime fighter. He had several, sidekicks and people who kind of, were part of the Justice Ducks as we kind of get ahead of ourselves there, but the unassuming man by day, hero by night. His daytime name was Drake Mallard. He lived in St. Canard, but actually by night he was Darkwing Duck, and was just your kind of standard classic Disney crime fighter.
Yeah, and it's interesting. There's a lot of kind of cool history here. Like Matt said, this was a Disney production, but when you watch it, it kind of has a feel of like an old Looney Tunes kind of slapstick, jokey humor, but also some of the Disney flavor to it as well. Since this one actually wasn't just a completely, it had origins in another series. Let's put it that way. It was an original creation, but it had its origins in another series. So actually, DuckTales ran before this, and there were a few characters that were ported over for this kind of spin-off series. And the world of Duckburg, which is the city in DuckTales, and St. Canard, which is the city in Darkwing Duck, they apparently kind of exist in the same world. So this originally ran from only 91 to 92, and they cranked out 91 episodes, I believe, in that time. And as as we've talked about on this show, that's just like an enormous output. I don't know how exactly they do it, but it was basically like, it ran for almost like one a day. So it was like a Monday through Friday show for a while. So, I mean, if you think about it, it really was only on for about a year and a half, the original episodes, and then it ran in syndication until 1995. So it was on for 4 or 5 years, but it was really only those 90 episodes that were produced. So that's pretty crazy.
Which blows my mind because, when I was a kid watching the show, I probably watched it in syndication in like the mid-90s, but, I just feel like it was on TV forever.
Yeah, and it pretty much was. 5 years, half a decade, when you're in the mid-90s, that does seem like it's just kind of on forever. And it got jumbled around, it was in afternoons, it was probably on some like Saturday mornings there for a while, but it was kind of just like always on. We do want to talk about...
And Dave, did you mention it was 91 episodes and it was over 3 seasons?
Yeah, over 3 seasons. And the IMDb breakdown was kind of weird, because it was like... they had like one run of seasons that was like 60 episodes, and then the other 2 were broken down into 15. So I don't quite know how that works out, and the dates didn't really match up either. But regardless, a year and a half, 90 episodes, and then they ran that in syndication for 5 more. The interesting story that kind of was behind this, we'll delve into the history a little bit more than we usually do, just to start this off. So, like I said, it started off as a spin-off from the DuckTales series. Now, there was one particular episode of DuckTales called Double O Duck, and that starred Launchpad McQuack, who we'll see quite often in this new series. Starred him as a secret agent. So that was just kind of a one-off from DuckTales. He was a secret agent. The powers that be over at Disney decided they liked that idea, and they wanted to develop a spin-off series with that kind of premise in mind. So a fellow by the name of Tad Stones, who had been working with the Disney animation in the television department, since I believe 1984, since its inception. He was there kind of from the beginning, and he's worked on a ton of stuff: the Aladdin series, DuckTales, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, just a ton of stuff. And he basically came up with the idea for Darkwing Duck. Now, originally, as Wikipedia cites, he was kind of reluctant about how he wanted to spin this thing off. He didn't think it was going to have a lot of emotional impact, or he just felt like it was kind of a thin approximation or a thin adaptation. So originally he had a pitch that still, I believe, had Launchpad McQuack as the central character. It had Gizmo Duck showing up. Basically, that was all rejected. So he went back to the drawing board, and he went back to sort of the golden age of heroes and the golden age of comics, with characters like the Shadow and Doc Savage, and definitely a lot of Batman influence, which we'll talk about on this show, because Darkwing, the hero, takes a lot from the Shadow, takes a lot from Batman, and then his villains, which are my favorite part of the show, take a lot from the different rogues galleries. But basically, he went back to the drawing board. He stopped doing the sort of the James Bond idea, which was actually good, because the 00 moniker is actually kind of owned by the James Bond, not company, but it's basically owned by them, so you can't really use it without getting sued. So it's a good thing that he dropped that. And then it turned.
So they couldn't use like 00 Duck.
So actually, it's kind of funny. There's an in-joke later on in the series, in Darkwing Duck, in an episode called "A Duck by Any Other Name," and Darkwing is talking to Launchpad, and he's like, "Man, maybe I should change my name. Maybe I should get a new alias." And he's like, "How about 00 Duck?" And Launchpad's like, that sounds kind of silly. So that's like the only time they ever reference it again, which I thought was pretty cool. Pretty cool idea, just going back to the history of it. So that's pretty much it, just to get you caught up on the history. I like that history more so than some of the other ones, because a lot of the ones we've talked about so far, they're like a toy company trying to push a cartoon to sell more toys. And that's all well and good. I mean, that's basically what the 80s and 90s were all about. But this one actually had a little bit more meat to it. As for the show itself, we'll talk about like how we remember it as kids, and how we see it again coming back as 30-somethings, just trying to revisit it, because I think it lost some of its luster. But let's get into the characters so we know who we're talking about and get an idea of the people that populate this show. So who wants to talk about our title hero here?
So I'll dive into that.
Take
so Darkwing Duck, a.k.a. Drake Mallard, voiced by Jim Cummings. He was the average citizen by day, superhero by night, kind of that classic story. But at the same time, he really, like his character as animated in the series, really had a lot of the Disney hallmarks, kind of the slapstick comedy, the good-natured person, like when he, adopts Goslin Mallard, who was the orphan you meet in literally the first episode. Yeah. There's a lot of like kind of that Disney family theme, kind of overtone, but at the same time, he's kind of like the first action hero from Disney that I really remember. I'm sure Disney had, other series with, a sort of action type character, but he was the first one with really an action focus, and in the show he really pursues that. It's not like a side story or like a main story with action on the side. It's really,
right.
He's pursuing crime fighting. It's really, that is the focus of the show.
Oh, dude, and it's like his life too. Like he even has this little like soliloquy where he's kind of depressed for a second. He's like, "Man, crime fighting is literally all I have. I have no friends. I have no family. Yeah. Crime fighting's all I have." And he's kind of like he pursues the limelight. But yeah, go ahead, Sean.
It's very sad. It's actually like a very troubling story of just like how unbelievably vain he is, and egotistical in terms of being able to, to fight crime. Like his motivation is simply to be in the spotlight. It's not to clean up the streets. It's not to make Saint Canard a better place. It is simply to get him on the front page and make himself a household name. And I mean, it's just the level of arrogance that you see like is unparalleled. And I mean, like to have this be in a Disney cartoon,
it was a little strange, a little jarring.
Is very, very weird.
We watched
Oh, I was gonna say to continue with talking about the characters and to quote Scott Pilgrim. Okay, let's start with Launchpad McQuack. As you had mentioned, thank you.
It took me a second.
As you had mentioned, he was one of the biggest ports from DuckTales.
Right.
And, it's one of those things where like you really don't see him in the first episode. The first episode we should mention is a two-parter. And so you don't see him in this first episode until Darkwing is like really kind of encountering sort of the main problem, which is fighting the villain Taurus Bulba,
voiced by Tim Curry, which is awesome.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so as he's fighting Taurus Bulba, which I'm going to say Taurus Bulba every time
because
I'm
they
in
certainly
reference to
did.
Taurus Bulba,
Yeah.
because they say it 1,000 times.
He's got this annoying kind of like assistant secretary who's like real bitchy, and just every time he orders her to do something, she's just like, yes, Taurus Bulba. It's very strange. At least 6 or 7 times in the first episode. But yeah.
So maybe I'm wrong in thinking this, but like I don't remember in DuckTales, I don't remember Launchpad being such a doofus.
I can't remember. We'd have to go back and watch it again. Matt, do you remember him being that retarded?
Yeah, he kind of was. He kind of was. And when you look at DuckTales, just kind of taking a one off for a second, there was like with Huey, Dewey, and Louis, there was kind of a lot of comic relief there. But
Huey, Dewey, and Louis.
Huey, Lewis, and the News, and Dewey.
Yeah, my bad.
That's
whatever. Cool. I spaced. Whatever.
I just didn't say it because I knew I would have fucked it up, so I just left it alone.
Huey, Dewey, Louie.
There we go.
Whatever.
They nailed it. You got it.
Lewis, my bad. So,
but they were the goofy parts for DuckTales, kind of.
Can we record over
See
that?
whenever you want to edit. No, we don't have editing capability here at SMC.
Nope. Great. But at any rate, so I mean, Launchpad was kind of like on top of that. He was kind of more like slapstick versus, when you look at DuckTales itself, there was a lot of like built-in comedy, but he was more like the physical comedy for that. Yeah. But in this show, he was actually more written in actually as like kind of a stand-in character with like more dialogue comedy. And it was interesting, like in an episode that I watched about half of called Tiff of the Titans. Actually, that was kind of a crossover where Fenton, or the guy that plays
Gizmo Duck.
What's his name? Gizmo. Yeah. So he actually comes in, and one of the lines that I picked up from like the first half of the episode was, they say it was something like, we used to work for the same guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Just
so
like
kind
a
of
nod
like,
to DuckTales and Scrooge.
Right.
Yeah.
The usual like tip of the hat. So it was really interesting in that way. Just the difference between DuckTales and then Darkwing Duck. The same character, just written in different ways. I thought it was kind of cool.
Yeah, he's kind of a dumb in this one though, just because he's kind of like his pilot, his mechanic, but he has this weird like tick of like driving things backwards, whether it's a plane, which doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any
except
sense.
for cartoon physics, or like he just crashes through stuff. It's very odd. It's just kind of strange, just like a weird quirk that he has.
Here's the thing, is that if Launchpad McQuack was your sidekick in any crime fighting scenario, you'd be dead within the first 5 minutes.
Well, let's talk about that, because even the rest of the Justice Ducks, which we'll get into, honestly, like Goslin, the little 9-year-old kind of Spitfire duck, she's probably the smartest and most capable.
She's a better crime fighter than grown adult Launchpad McQuack.
Well, he's surrounded by idiots. So Darkwing, he's not great himself, let's be honest. He just kind of lucks into things, which I think is why, even as a kid, I had issues with him as a hero, because he just kind of bumbles his way through things.
Can we talk about that? Because you said, because I know you alluded to it earlier, but I mean, I know we're talking about it now.
Sure.
Like the contrast between what you saw when you were a child versus like now as a 30-something, like when you're watching it, how you're feeling.
Well, look, even as a kid, I can remember never quite being a huge fan of Darkwing. I kind of like rolled my eyes at a lot of the stuff that he did. I liked the villains. I'll be honest. I really liked the villains in this, because I felt like in most episodes the villain should have won, except for their infighting amongst themselves. That's really the only thing that ever prevented them from losing. They usually were really close to winning, and then because they fought amongst themselves, they would lose. Right. It had nothing to do with like the tact or the strategy or the intelligence of the heroes. They're just like bumbling idiots, and they really just kind of luck. And I compared it this way, like the Adam West version of Batman.
No, I wrote the exact same thing.
Yeah, that's the closest comparison I can think, versus any other Batman, honestly.
I wrote that this is like a mashup of Adam West Batman, and then they picked certain elements from DC's Batman as well as also from Marvel Shield.
They do have a lot of those
the Nick Fury Shield pieces. Like there was so much things that they were just like, yeah, we like this one element we'll pull it over and we'll adapt it into the
You
show.
can,
Like,
as a fan of like comics and stuff, comic fans can see like exactly what. There's a lot of like very obvious parallels between villains or between the heroes themselves. Like Gizmo Duck is very obviously kind of like a RoboCop type character. A lot of the villains are ported over almost exactly with origins and stuff from other villains in the comics, just with like a funnier kind of origin, more of kind of like an on the nose kind of origin, which is fun.
And whenever we talk about them, I went down and I like listed all of the different comparisons to everything for.
And actually,
everybody.
We should. I want to get over the.
Well, I
Ducks.
wanted to say, like, I remember watching this, like, in contrast to what you were saying. Like, I actually remember watching this on TV, and I loved this show. Like, this is one of my favorite. Like, aside from maybe like Saved by the Bell. You know, this is like one of my favorite cartoons to like come home and like watch like after school, and like watching it now, it was bizarre, and like there were moments that were like really, really unbelievably grating, and I don't know what it is. I don't know, and like I don't know if I'm just being cynical.
Yeah, I think it's just like the age range. Well, Matt, this was actually your pick, so I'm curious to know what you think of like when you watched it as a kid versus going back and revisiting it. I will say real quick that we were all actually lucky enough to hang out together in DC this weekend for Matt's bachelor party, and we did take about an hour out of our time to watch the parts 1 and 2 of the first episode. So that was really cool to be able to hang out with these guys in person because now we're spread all across the country again. So yeah, what was your feeling between watching it as a kid and then going back, 20 some years later?
I got to say, the first 2 episodes that we watched, Darkwing Duck kind of, held a really, high place in my, cartoon memory. Yeah. But going back and watching the first 2 episodes, by about 5 minutes into the episode, I was like, wow, talk about fall from grace. I mean, it was pretty brutal. But I think that's because, kind of the other shows we watched, the first 2, 3, like 5 episodes, they're kind of like finding their stride.
Exactly.
Because when we watched Justice Ducks, which was later in the series, I was like, this is what I remember.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like the first 2 episodes, I was like, yikes! I remember this being totally different.
And we weren't even really like joking about it. We were just kind of like, ooh, this is kind of cringy.
Yeah,
I mean, the original Darkwing Duck from like the pilot is almost like I was equating it to like if Batman had like solved crime, or if he had like beaten up a bad guy and then was just like, oh, just so you know, I'm doing this because my parents died because of another criminal.
Yeah, every time. Also, if he did it every time.
Would you take my photo and make sure that it got to the paper?
Yeah, here's a headshot.
Batman, spelled Batman.
It was that kind of take on Batman's character, like not the self-sacrificing hero, but the hero that was doing it for the limelight. So that was just a little weird.
I mean, like he did it only for himself. Yeah. I mean, that was the entire point, was that like he was doing it just for him.
Well, and I'll say why that was important, because we do have Gosselin come in, who Baron mentioned earlier. It's this 9-year-old kid. She was orphaned at a young age, raised by her grandfather, who's like a famous scientist. He gets killed by the main villain in the first episode, so she kind of crosses paths with Darkwing Duck. Long story short, his alter ego adopts her, so they kind of become like this crime-fighting duo. And that actually is good for him. That shows kind of like some character development for him, because he starts to care for her like his own daughter, and it gives him a reason to fight crime above and beyond his own kind of selfish interests, which was pretty sophisticated for one of these cartoons. Yeah.
And in much later episodes, there's the whole idea of Gosselin being like kidnapped.
Yeah, pretty dark,
and
actually.
There's a parallel universe where like Darkwing becomes a supervillain as a result of Gosselin being kidnapped and him not being able to deal and cope with the idea. Like, really, the only fear that Darkwing Drake Mallard has is any harm coming to Gosselin Waddlemeyer. Now, I guess Gosselin Mallard.
Gosselin Mallard, yeah. So before we get into the Negaverse and all the craziness that entails, which was actually a pretty cool kind of plot line for a show like this, I want to just kind of lightning round some of these Justice Ducks. Now, these are the allies of Darkwing Duck, because as things develop, he gets more and more villains. He stops doing some solo adventures, and he actually kind of has to team up with some people. So let's lightning round through these guys. I've got the other 4. Besides Launchpad and Gosselin. Do you guys remember? Well, obviously Gizmo Duck. We should probably start with him.
So there was Gizmo Duck, there was Morgana, who was also Darkwing's love interest.
Oh, she calls him Dark.
It's
so weird. It's like,
so bizarre.
Because Launchpad calls him DW, she just calls him Dark, which is weird, but whatever.
Right.
But Gizmo Duck, everybody kind of knows, too. He's like kind of the RoboCop. He's a little goofy, too, but...
So Morgana was more kind of like a... like Mistress of the Dark.
Yeah, she started off more on the villainous side of a magic user.
Real Bride of Frankenstein.
Very Bride of Frankenstein, yeah.
Very Bride of
She
Frankenstein.
got the hair. She got the like.
I was
flowing
I was
robe.
thinking like Elvira, like she kind of had like a Mistress of the Dark, like
Yeah.
Elvira kind of vibe to her as well. But
little
I
bit.
think Matt, you're more accurate with Bride of
Or
Frankenstein.
who's the one from Adam's Family, Morticia?
Morticia,
Yeah,
yeah,
She
little
kind of had,
Morticia.
Morticia.
yeah, she kind of had. I mean, the dress was the same kind of that like flare out at the bottom thing.
Well,
That's what I was.
and the design is interesting because they had to separate her from Magica Dispel, which was the sort of
Right.
sorceress duck from DuckTales. They had this weird thing to just be like, yeah, fuck it, let's just shoehorn magic in here for no reason. But whatever, it kind of worked.
Oh,
It
and
was
her
fun.
magic power is that she can turn everything into pudding. Perfect.
Yeah, well,
Wonderful.
she's actually pretty powerful. Like, she can just turn things into anything else. Like, she turned a stove into like a guy playing an accordion one time for no
Yeah,
reason.
it's super powerful.
Funny, but
It's
she's
super
just
powerful.
like she's really bad at aiming, and she's bad at remembering like what words to use for what spell. So she turns Darkwing Duck into like a variety of
look,
different
just,
things.
Hey, just Dave. She's a shitty wizard.
She's a
all right?
shitty
She's
wizard.
A shitty fucking
She's a
wizard.
shizzard. Yeah, it's
She's
pretty bad.
a shizzard. She's terrible.
But speaking of terrible sidekicks, the two that are kind of like throwaways for me, which look like somebody just doodled these things out and was just like, fuck it, it's good enough, we got to go into production. There's Neptunia, which is this
man.
little like tadpole looking thing with legs, and she's supposed to be like the protector of the sea. So she's kind of
Was she,
like
like-
the shittier
Was she,
Aquaman.
was she a tadpole or was she like a full?
I don't know
Like
what-
she was like a
Shoot.
she was like a fish with legs.
But
It was
kind of
weird.
is like it was a weird looking just little blob of a creature.
All right,
I
well,
think,
then
I
she's
think the word you're
completely-
looking there, Sean, is missing link.
Yeah.
You could say she's like a
Well-
mud skipper, basically. She's a mud
I
skipper.
mean,
Well, I mean,
I
then
had to give
her-
him, I had to give him 2 points for the name just because, like, the Neptunia. I was like, all right, I'll give it to you, but the
all you
rest
get.
of it, I was like, and this is a trash.
She basically
I
all
like
she
how
does
you're
is
giving
like
reluctant points. You're just like, yeah, I'll give it to you, but like I'm not happy about.
I'm not
this
happy. Well, all she does is
scenario.
like something falls in the ocean, and she just like spears it with her like trident, drops it in front of Darkwing's feet, and just be like, "Is this yours?" And then just jumps back into the water.
dumb
She doesn't do
shit.
a whole lot except like keep trash out of the ocean. That's about
Well,
it.
the amazing thing is that she's completely contrasted in terms of stature by
Yes,
Stegmont.
anyone else? Yeah, anyone else, but especially Stegmont.
No, by
Oh,
Stegmont.
Stegmont is the
Stegmont
worst.
is just the worst.
Who's got his origin? Because his origin might be my favorite. It's kind of a toxic Avenger meets
He was a janitor,
yeah,
and
a
he
duck
got
faced
like
a duck janitor. Yeah,
he was a duck janitor, and like he got exposed to some like fossil or
Doctor.
something.
It
No,
was a mad scientist
Dr.
named
Fossil.
Dr. Fossil.
Dr. Fossil. Did he experiment on him?
He had some sort of ray gun, I think, that like turned other
course.
things into dinosaurs. So like Darkwing was actually a dinosaur for part of that episode. They turned him back, but for whatever reason, which I can't remember, Stegmont decided to just stay this like 8 foot tall bipedal Stegosaurus mongoloid. He's not real bright. He's just kind of
Yeah, Mongoloid is pretty descriptive.
he's just kind of like he's got a child's mind, and he's kind of the team's muscle.
Let's just say he's very simple.
He's very simple. Like, you know, you can take the
Unbelievably
Fantastic
simple.
Four's The Thing, and dumb him down.
And then
a
dumb
few
him down
notches.
to like an IQ of like 0.
He's more like the Thing version from the Venture Brothers. He's kind of like that level of. So he's just their dumb muscle. But now I
It's
really.
just
Do you guys
sad.
have anything more for Justice Ducks? I really do want to talk about Fearsome Five because they're my favorite.
No, let's go to Fearsome 5 now.
Oh,
I'm
they're
excited
so good.
about this.
I'm gonna leave Negaduck for the last because he's
Let's do it.
pretty awesome. So
I'm gonna get into Quackerjack.
you like Quackerjack? Let's
is-
do that.
Quackerjack is the equivalent of the Joker.
Yes.
He has basically the same arsenal as the Joker, and like it's uncanny. I mean, they put him in like in sort of like a court jester's
Yeah, he's in the Harlequin
like
kind
outfit,
of. Yeah,
and it's perfect. He's a wonderful villain.
he's nuts.
You know, I kind of got more Riddler than Joker.
It's a weird combination of the two, yeah.
Okay,
Or
I
like
can
even
see- I
Toy
can see
Man
a
a little
combo.
bit because he's like a deranged
Ooh.
toy maker that uses them to like commit crimes, and the Joker thing comes from him just causing chaos. Like sometimes he doesn't really have a plan; he just does things just to see what happens. So that's a very
Some
Joker.
people just want to see the world burn.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a very Joker
ha,
kind of thing to do.
ha, ha.
Matt, did you have a favorite villain of these guys?
You know, actually, I really liked the Liquidator.
Okay, I fucking hate that guy so much.
What?
I hate him so much.
Okay.
Do you know his actually on the site this week? I did a little bit more prep for our viewers and listeners. If you guys go to the site, there is a walkthrough of all the different characters. So if you need like a visual to look at as we're talking about this, I'd recommend checking out the site and checking them out. But go ahead, Matt. Tell us about Liquidator and his terrible origin story.
Oh,
Okay,
come on.
It's so
I
bad.
had I had to look it up after watching Justice Ducks because
Yeah.
I was like, I've just got to know. So recapping it, he say, okay, and the puns are starting right from the beginning.
Oh, they're so good.
Yeah.
So the Liquidator is a dog,
Yep.
but
Yeah.
he is a slimy dog salesman who was in the bottled water business.
So I had to read that a couple of times because I'm like, is he selling slimy dogs? Is he a slimy salesman of dogs? Is he a dog who's a slimy salesman?
but
what was his name before he became the Liquidator?
Bud Flood.
Yeah.
God damn it.
But he fell into a vat of the competitor's water, which I was like, that would have been a great, like, kind of Two-Face sort of thing.
It's very much
But
one of those origins just made completely goofy. Yeah.
Exactly. But I was like, the thing that I loved about watching the Liquidator in Justice Ducks was the fact that not only did he have the Liquidator kind of like the sales attitude, but he would, like, and just like everything was like a sales pitch or like kind of like a sales tagline.
He's got that smarmy kind of like used car salesman.
He was like a snake oil salesman
my
for
God.
everything.
Exactly.
So irritating.
But at the same time, like, you know, I could just see, you know, before I watched the episode before I looked up his story, and I was like, you know, God, this guy, like the Liquidator thing, like, he's got to be some kind of salesman. And then when I looked it up, I was like, oh, it's all coming together in all the wrong way.
That's such a brilliant, like, I would have loved to be in the writer's room for that one when they broke that character. Just been like,
Exactly.
just crushing the puns left and right.
Yeah, I mean, it was like kind of like a, you know, just a hilarious moment for me because it was like one of those like classic Disney villains who, you know, was just really cheesy, but at the same time kind of had like a little bit of a story behind the cheese, like something that was just like motivating the cheese.
Yeah, and we didn't get to see it in Justice Ducks, but he has these two like sidekick like mascots that are kind of like female fluid creatures, I think. That like
Did you look up the name of the episode in which they debuted in?
No, which one was that? Do you know?
Yeah,
it was called Dry Hard. Yep.
Oh Jesus. My favorite thing about this villain, actually with all the villains, is kind of like how they defeat them. All right, so let's save that for the episode plot because that's kind of like a final moment of the Justice Ducks. But I do want to talk about Megavolt because he's probably my favorite. I think he was actually Tad Stone, the creator. I think that was his favorite character too, his favorite villain. That's why this guy shows up like the most out of anything. He's got a bizarre kind of like origin story. He was basically like this rat humanoid that was a nerdy high school student, and he actually went to St. Canard High with Drake Mallard. So their story goes all the way back to high school, and the first time that they battle is in senior prom. So I guess Megavolt kind of like he gets his electrical powers from some like a sabotaged electrical experiment. He just becomes, well, first of all, he's completely insane. He's nuts. He thinks all electrical appliances and light bulbs and anything with like a battery in it is like like a living animate object that he needs to liberate and like make friends with. He's really bizarre. He's got a weird like obsessive compulsive kind of condition, but basically he tries to like destroy senior prom, and originally Drake Mallard takes on the Darkwing persona all the way back at his senior prom to prevent him from doing that. So that's kind of like a weird origin story that pops up kind of out of nowhere. But this guy's nuts, and as you might imagine, Megavolt and Liquidator don't quite get along so well because electricity and water do not often mix. So that's kind of an interesting kind of play that they have within the Fearsome Five. The fourth member of the Fearsome Five is also a fun one. His name's Dr. Reginald Bushroot. You want to take that one, Sean?
God,
he's fun. I like him.
Bushroot, yeah, I like Bushroot as well.
Yeah,
like,
he's a sweet guy.
I didn't see any problem with him. He was actually more of kind of like the more sympathetic villains that they had that were kind of in the Fearsome Five.
Yeah,
like
he's
he was
really sad.
He was essentially he's very sad.
Yeah.
It's depressing to watch. It's So Reginald Bushroot is more. He's kind of like if you were to like Poison Ivy from Batman.
Yeah, but like and she has her sympathetic moment. She actually kind of turns kind of hero later on too. Yeah.
And so he was trying to do some like DNA fusion between like plants and animals.
As you do.
And, yeah, of course, 100%. Yeah. And so he ended up. He was successful with the experiment, but it was obviously at a price of like combining him into this half plant, half duck creature.
Right.
So he has, just like Poison Ivy, he has control over all the plants that are around him.
Yeah, and he's got kind of like these little sidekicks. One's kind of like a Venus flytrap dog.
Yeah.
Another one is like this weird vampiric potato, which was very trippy and kind of strange. That kind of came out of his like side experiments and stuff. But he's fine. I mean, most of the time he's just trying to like. Most of the time he's trying to find a girlfriend or a friend, actually, which is kind of a weird side story because it's like he's almost got that Mr. Freeze kind of thing where he's more like doing it out of love or trying to, but failing miserably. And of course, being part of the Fearsome Five doesn't help. Now, anything else from these four? Because we need to talk about Negaduck before we move on to the plot.
Let's get into Negaduck.
Negaduck. First of all, the coolest thing about him, I think, is that he's voiced by Jim Cummings, who's the same guy that voices Darkwing Duck. So,
which got a little confusing for me watching Justice Ducks.
Well, the thing that I really liked about that is that it was really kind of like the yin and yang thing. So it was like Darkwing Duck is good, Negaduck is bad. I mean, obviously the Negaduck name aside, the scene where I think it was right after Darkwing Duck, mysteriously found out where their hideout was with the huge flag on top.
Yes.
But they like did that kind of like, saying the same thing at the same time. I was like, well, obviously they're voiced by the same people, but I thought it was really interesting how like Darkwing Duck was, kind of the all good, and Negaduck was kind of the all bad.
Super. Super.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was like
he was like a bizarro Superman.
Yeah, he's like an inversion of Darkwing, like even down to his costume and stuff. So Darkwing's kind of got like a lot of deep purples and blues. Negaduck has like yellows and like a red, so it's a very like stark contrast when they're standing next to each other. But it's kind of cool because they do like dress as each other to kind of dupe whoever they decide they want to dupe at the time. So like Negaduck will look like Darkwing to pull off heists and give him a bad name, even though he still has like the evil black eyebrows. Or Darkwing will dress as Negaduck to like infiltrate the idiotic Fearsome Five. So it's
and whenever he does, they still retain whatever the eye mask is.
Yeah, exactly. For whatever reason, to keep the viewers
in line.
It's
not very hard to tell whether or not they are the actual person that they say they are. It's really here's the thing. They all do a really poor job at like whatever their job is. If it's crime fighting, they're doing a poor job.
Yeah, everybody's terrible. If it's perpetrating crimes, you're so bad at either crime fighting or perpetrating crimes that you're losing to the people who are equally terrible at doing their job. So it's just Saint Canard is probably fine with just a police force because these idiots just kind of take themselves out of the equation.
Yeah, like you should feel bad about how you're behaving and like what the objective that you're trying to accomplish. You should feel shitty about not being able to accomplish that objective because the things that are standing in your way are equally as shitty.
They're made for each other.
Now, should Saint Canard be okay with its police force? Because in Justice Ducks, when they put the force field around the city with no top on it, I really feel like the whole plot could be negated by a helicopter.
Yeah,
okay. Are we going to recap on episode 1 and 2, or do we want to jump right into?
We can just go to briefly. I mean, we've kind of already talked about like the pilots to set it up.
To jump into then Matt's comment about them like dropping the dome over top of Saint Canard. Yep. Here's my favorite thing is that like at one of the commercial breaks, you come back and Darkwing is just like, oh my god, how long have I been out? And then like a second later, it cuts back to Launchpad McQuack, and he's just like, the Fearsome Five took over the city in 5 minutes, and that's the amount of time that has elapsed, like from the point that like Darkwing got knocked out, 5 minutes, Fearsome Five took over the city.
So
they were that good at doing this. Why haven't they done this every freaking time?
I'll tell you why. So this is actually, I believe, the first episode that both the Justice Ducks form and the Fearsome Five actually gets together. I think up until this point, now granted it's only 20 episodes into this thing, so I think up until this point, like Gizmo Duck might have come in as a one-off. Morgana eventually came in as like his love interest. The other two generic kind of fish and dinosaur sidekicks, they came in too. But they hadn't really all worked together. And actually the kind of arc of these two episodes, it's a two-parter, Just Us, Justice Ducks, parts 1 and 2. The arc of this whole thing is the Justice Ducks learning to work together, and Darkwing kind of learning that sometimes he needs them and sometimes they need him. That's his big
And that's
lesson.
the amazing thing is that entire the entire first part of that this two-parter is just Darkwing bitching about the fact that he does not want to receive help from other people.
I don't really
he wants
blame
to
him.
take the limelight for
I
himself.
don't blame him though, because like just for an example, he's driving around and in his little motorcycle, and Stegmutt is for whatever reason driving a hot dog cart, and he crashes right into him, and just pretty much.
Hey, we said he was simple. We said he was
pretty
simple.
much ruins
Yeah,
his day.
Stegmutt got to make ends meet.
Got to make ends meet,
Yeah.
man. Yeah, so that was a little weird. But yeah, that's the whole point, is them trying to like learn to work together. However, on the flip side of that, and this is pretty cool writing, the Fearsome Five, up until this point, like each of these individual villains, they had their own time squaring off against Darkwing Duck and never quite got the better of him. While now, much like there was the Justice League and I want to say Legion of Doom, but that's like a wrestling thing.
No, it was Sinister Six. This was a direct rip-off
Sinister.
of Sinister Six.
Yeah, I mean it is with Fearsome Five, but it's kind of like
They
any
borrowed
villainous team up.
They
Yeah.
borrowed so many villains from
Oh yeah,
Spider-Man.
like Hydra
in this
Man
case.
and yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically these guys team up as well, and they get the upper hand for the majority of the two-parter, like literally right up until the very end.
Well, yeah, I mean, they took over the city in 5 minutes, Dave. I mean, like,
Yeah,
you
and
know.
it was pretty well done. But that's why they haven't done it before, because they haven't teamed up before. So I mean, the first
Dave,
time it's like,
not only
okay,
did
well,
they take off the city, but they carved out the city
Yes.
to 5 different districts
it's like Hunger Games.
that were evidently exactly that was already like predetermined. They were just like they wander into the area where all the water, like Darkwing wanders in, and he's just like, oh, this must be liquid.
Yeah, because there's fucking water everywhere.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Great, you've been out for all of 5 minutes and you've been able to piece this together, you dum-dum.
It was
Like-
it was tough. It was better than the pilot. The pilot was a little grating, like we talked about before, and like Matt said earlier, they did kind of find their footing by this point. The humor was a little more, it was a little tighter. Writing was a little tighter, but it was still just very slapsticky and just very goofy and very much aimed at like a younger audience, which is fine. It's perfectly fine for me. It's just like now looking back on it as like a 30-year-old. It was difficult for me to sit through at times. There were a couple things that made me laugh, but I wasn't quite as entranced by it as I was when I was a kid. You know?
The thing that made me laugh about the Justice Ducks was I really think that everybody who's in the city of Saint Canard would benefit from a class in personal finance.
Why do you say this?
Because there were multiple instances of them trying to pay either Megavolt or Liquidator, and like two doctors wheeled a wheelbarrow full of
With
cash,
cash just
full
like
of
flying
loose
away in the
cash.
wind. Yeah.
Just like oh
Yeah.
no, we don't need that extra.
I hope
like,
this is
$20,
enough
like,
to turn
Yeah.
the lights back on.
They didn't even like
Exactly.
count it. They were
That
just
was
like
the light.
fill the
That was
barrel.
the light.
Yeah.
They fill a wheelbarrow up and they just Matt, you're 100% correct, because I wrote the line down because I was like, this is so ridiculous. I hope this is enough money to get the power back on at the hospital. Like, oh my god, like just such a crazy amount of exposition. Like it is just it's ridiculous. And then the one scene where they're trying to pay the Liquidator, this woman just goes, "This is all of my life savings," and she's just holding loose stacks of money in her hand, like she's never heard of a bank before. Like she's been putting it like in a shoebox underneath her bed, and was just like, "Oh yeah, I'll save this for a rainy
Well, look,
day."
man,
Like,
crime
this
is
solid,
running
man.
rampant
Oh, my-
in St. Canard.
Oh
I
my
wouldn't trust my
God.
money in the bank. The police
Also,
are
think
scared
of
of
the
chattering
deflation.
teeth.
Yeah, I mean,
Come
think
on.
of the deflation with Scrooge McDuck holding all of the gold
Very true.
reserves.
It's very true.
I mean, your paper money would be literally worthless.
It's like $1,000 for a loaf of bread at St.
Exactly. It's like 2,000% inflation.
Well,
in
no,
that
no,
universe.
Dave, that's what he was charging. He was charging the woman a raft. He's like,
Yeah,
the
extortion.
Liquidator floods this part of town. You can buy a life raft for a low price of $1 million. And she gives him the money, and he goes, "Payment or what was it? Installment payment plans are available," and just like grabs her cash. Like,
The Liquidator.
freaking ridiculous.
So
The
good
Liquidator.
and so terrible. God, he was so annoying. But the cool part, I
You
think,
reminded
was
me
this.
so much of Clayface.
Who, I do? Or Liquidator does?
No,
I
you
was like, how
you
do I
remind me
remind
of
you of
Clayface
Clayface? Doesn't even make sense.
because you morphed into different. I
Matt
don't know, it doesn't
Hagen.
matter. So yeah, exactly. Matt Hagen. So yeah, it was. He reminded me of a lot of Clayface. I know he was based off of like Hydra Man or something like that, but I mean, like it just. There were a lot of elements that were about it that were just a lot of fun.
But we,
So
yeah,
I
we
think
gotta
what-
get how.
I gotta.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think he was probably one of my out of like the Fearsome Five. I think he was. I think he may have been my favorite.
Dude, look, I will tell you my favorite part of him is how they defeat him, and we'll get to that in a second. So another thing the Fearsome Five do, they not only take over the city and try to just like basically just extort money from people, they want to take out the Justice Ducks. And they
Right.
nearly achieve it, 80% success rate. So they capture all the idiots, they put them in very specific devices in sort of this Rube Goldberg machine that's like going to step by step take each one of them out, and as they're taking each one of them out, whatever happens to that person causes the next thing in like a chain reaction to affect. So like it's like they plug in Gizmo Duck and like flip a switch and like electrocute him. The electricity from that, I'm trying to remember what it goes to. Oh, it goes to a heat lamp that is like frying Neptunia because she's like bolted to this to the floor, which somehow turns on this big like bellows thing, which sucks the air out of a glass tube that they've captured Stegmutt in for some reason, so they're asphyxiating him. And they've got Morgana trapped in like this vice that is slowly crushing her head, I guess. I found that kind of disturbing.
It was weird.
That was a little disturbing. And so then Darkwing's just kind of loose. There's a point where the Fearsome Five wants to revolt against Negaduck, because he's a real jerk, and he calls them losers all the time, and he hates them, but he needs them for like means to an end. They want to revolt against him, so cue Darkwing Duck dressed as Negaduck walking into the fray when they decided they want to attack him. That was kind of a funny moment for me.
Well, hold on.
Yeah.
I wanna back up like 2 seconds.
Okay,
so like the thing that was amazing about like the Fearsome Five deciding that they were gonna like conspire against Negaduck was that they used the actual phrase like we should kill him.
Yeah, it wasn't even like we should overthrow him.
We should like
supplant
it's not like we should get rid of him. Like we should we
should kill. And they looked at the camera.
Flat out, they just looked at the fucking camera,
viewer,
break the fourth wall, and they just go, "We should kill him."
Super creepy.
Like,
but then they flipped. As soon as Negaduck walked back in, they're just like, "Oh shit, never mind, not a good idea."
Whoops, screwed that up. No, because Darkwing Duck shows up as Negaduck.
Right. With his purple mask, though. So
right, and so they're so nobody's fooling anybody, and so like they all decide like in this fit of rage, they're just like, let's get Darkwing Duck, let's get Negaduck dressed.
You got it.
Like dressed who is as Darkwing, right. And so they attack Darkwing Duck dressed as Negaduck, and then Negaduck comes in and is just like, what the fuck is going on here? Like,
and then he
what
are you dum-dums doing?
Like, what are you dum-dums doing? Like, are you seriously trying to get rid of me? Because I will get rid of all of them.
Yeah. So he threatens them, kind of whips them back into shape. And then they've got the whole Justice Ducks rounded up. The funny thing was they basically just had Darkwing Duck standing there, and after all these crazy machinations, Negaduck just comes after him with a chainsaw. Like that, that was his entire plan.
He goes full American Psycho on him.
I was going to say, wasn't that the tilde key in Doom?
Right, exactly. Just like out of nowhere, just chainsaw time. Didn't Darkwing... Oh, man, I'm trying to remember now. I'm trying to remember how he got out of it. He had a well-placed shot that, like... So here's the thing with this Rube Goldberg machine. Once you take out one of those pieces, the entire machine is defunct now at this point. Yep. So he, like, shoots one of them, breaks the generator, frees Gizmo Duck. Gizmo Duck cuts his way out, or cuts the glass to let Stegmutt out. Basically, everybody is free at this point. It's just kind of like a free-for-all. So the Justice Ducks are fighting the Fearsome Five. Everybody's kind of like paired off, and they're squaring off against their others. I don't remember 100% how they took care of everybody except Liquidator. So if you guys remember how they defeated the rest of them, I think Morgana turned a bunch of them just into stuff.
Just into pudding. I mean, it doesn't...
there's
and technically, wasn't it more Jello than pudding?
Yeah, so
because they did retain a mold.
They did retain a mold.
They did.
Well, he set up. He was cold enough that he just set instantly. Yeah, so Liquidator, pretty much 100% water. How do you defeat something that's 100% liquid? You just douse
you and I talked about this.
Yes, offline.
So yours was much more murderous than mine was. I was like, add any thickening agent.
Yeah, you just wanted to add like a gelatin or.
Yeah. What was your
I said if
suggestion?
you're gonna do it right and just dump cement on him. And guess what? He's done. That's game over for Liquidator. He is no longer a problem because he's done.
That's dark. That's almost as dark as looking to the camera right now and just being like, "Let's kill him."
Now they're talking about me as the host of the podcast. So if you guys don't hear from me in future weeks, the gruesome twosome has taken me out here.
Hey guys, if you see Dave, let's kill him.
I'm going to come dressed as Sean
next
week. I'll come dressed as Nega Sean. Did you guys, we're at about 45 minutes here, so I want to do some miscellaneous stuff. Do you have anything else from these episodes, or did you watch any other episodes that you want to kind of flavor the discussion with?
I didn't have a chance to.
Yeah,
I'd like to go back and I'd like to watch a couple more.
Yeah.
I watched the 4 episodes, the first 2, and then the Justice Ducks.
Right.
I think it was episode 20 and 21.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back and I'd like to watch more because I remember watching this show very fondly. But when Dave, when you and I talked about this a little bit offline earlier today, I've been kind of encountering this thing lately where I remember shows fondly, and then I watch them now, and I don't know if I get frustrated. I don't know if I'm too cynical, or if I'm having just a problem digesting some of the things that should be more slapstick and enjoyable.
Right.
And maybe I'm enjoying them now, but like I take note of the things that I find to be peculiar in each one of the shows.
I think it's kind of the double-edged. Go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say, I think, Darkwing Duck kind of, is the first show that I watched a ton of compared to the other shows we've reviewed recently. And the thing that I've really kind of noticed is that it's that, looking back on it, considering all the other shows that we've watched between, everything else that we've reviewed up until now, Darkwing Duck was really, it was really great for the time.
Right. But
when you fast forward, it's like, okay, yeah, that was real campy, but at the same time, rewind back to 1993, talk about loving that show. I mean, in 1993, I was 10, so I was just really hitting the stride of this show. So, I mean, I think that's why I loved it so much, but looking back on it, I'm like, when you watch a show like that when you're 31, you're just like, good Lord, what was I thinking?
Yeah, it's like watching your kid's show today or something. It's like
exactly, and I really felt that way with episodes 1 and 2. I was like, dear God, I remember this totally differently. But with Justice Ducks, it was and that's when I was like, okay, this is what I remember.
Yeah.
I remember it totally differently when I was 10. But watch episodes 1 and 2, and then watch Justice Ducks 1 and 2, and it's almost like a totally different show.
Yeah, they did definitely come into their own. And this is kind of the pros and cons of doing this show, which I think is awesome. The pros and the cons. Because for us, we get to go back and revisit some things that we remember fondly from our childhood, or that other people who have that opinion, they share with us and they ask us, definitely check this show out. At the same time, it kind of ruins those childhood memories where if you don't go back and watch it 20 years later, you're like, man, that was a great show, and it'll always be a great show. And now that we go back and watch them, sometimes that luster kind of starts to shake off a little bit, and they don't quite stand the test of time. So that's kind of the pros and cons of doing this, but it's good because we kind of encourage listeners to do that too. Definitely go back and check them out. I don't want to ruin them for you, but go back and check them out and kind of approach it with an objective kind of viewpoint. Yeah, Sean.
I know that I had mentioned this to you earlier today, Dave, but I'm now calling this. I'm not calling this the Voltron problem.
The Voltron effect.
Yeah, the Voltron effect, and that the Voltron effect is that I loved Voltron when I was a kid, and I remember watching it on television very fondly. Yeah. And I loved it, and I had the toys. I was emphatic about it, and then I remember watching it when it first came out on DVD, mid 2000s, and I Netflixed the entire first season of it, watched it, and I only got maybe 5 to 10 episodes in, and I was just like, what the hell am I watching? It blew my mind. Yeah. And so this show did not go full Voltron for me.
Yeah.
And I should say that I did end up watching a couple episodes of Voltron this afternoon.
Just for fun.
Just for fun, because I wanted to see if it was still if it still happened. And I'll be honest with you, the first 2 episodes of Voltron didn't even go full Voltron for me. I'm still trying to figure out what happened to me, back in 2006, whenever they released it, made me question the cartoons that I had been watching as a kid. But I mean, this Voltron effect is real, and I mean, it's very nostalgia based, as much of this podcast is.
Yeah,
and so,
definitely.
Being able to look back on some of these things, I'm curious what Voltron effect other people have had watching other shows that they loved when they were younger.
I'm sure
and
we're
now
gonna
how
have
they
more.
compare now.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have more as we do more and more shows. I think some of it is just inevitable. It's a maturity that you have, hopefully, from the time you're 10 to the time you're 30. You've obviously got more maturity just with life experience and how you view things. For me, I spend most of my time looking at movies and TV shows either to write up the news on them or to actually critically review them. So again, that's kind of a double-edged sword because now I don't enjoy as much as I used to because I have to look at it with a critical eye, and that kind of takes a lot of that just basic level enjoyment out because I have to just be like, it had a good premise, but the writing was terrible, the blocking was weird, the lighting, all that technical kind of stuff. So now it's more difficult for me to go back and enjoy something that's very light and family-friendly and kid-friendly, something like Darkwing Duck, because I nitpick even though I don't want to nitpick. I just want to sit there and enjoy it. So I think that's just part of like life. If I came on this podcast and told you that like Darkwing Duck remained my favorite thing ever, then you might want to
I would call
maybe
you
question me, and that's not saying anything about any viewers out there who have all 90 episodes on Laserdisc and still enjoy watching it.
I would Laserdisc.
Yeah, we're going back Laserdisc. For the kids out there who don't know what Laserdiscs, just Google it. You'll see a big, like a 4-foot wide shiny disc.
It's a shiny record.
It's a big shiny record.
I'd recommend watching the first 2 episodes of the show if you can.
Really, the pilot? You want to recommend them?
Well, here's
I would recommend.
Sean, let me jump on that for a second. I would say watch those 2 and then watch any later 2 episodes.
Any other 2.
No. You assholes got to let me finish. All right,
nope,
I would definitely recommend.
I
will not. You shut up, you. No, I think you need to watch. I think you need to watch the pilot to just appreciate some of the older episodes that are in the season. Right. Because I mean, hey, look, every pilot is a little bit rough. Yeah. They're trying to find their voice. They're a little rough around the edges. But I mean, like this one particularly hits a lot of notes in terms of like the ego of Darkwing and the motivation for what.
Yeah, it sets a stage for his character.
Continually reoccurs throughout every single episode. And I think it's good just to note that and just see how that progresses throughout the series. I would recommend recommend the first 2 episodes. They're the first and the second part of a 2-parter. And then going back and looking through any, like Matt said, anything else that's in a future season.
Yeah. Matt, did you have any other specific ones you would recommend? This was your recommendation this week, so I didn't know if you had any other.
I kind of watched, or I'll say that Just Us Justice Ducks, which is a fucking mouthful.
Yeah, you gotta be careful with that one.
I've got it.
Is it?
Ha ha. But I'll say that, those are the only 2 episodes I watched in their entirety of the later episodes.
Right.
I watched about, I'd say maybe the first 5 to 10 minutes of about, half a dozen other episodes just to kind of see like, is this as bad as I remember? But I know we all wanted to watch the same couple episodes to talk about them, so I really stuck to those. But the thing is that the first 2 episodes, I mean, it's like kind of a Disney kind of microcosm. Mm-hmm. So watch those 2, and then watch really anything past that. Like even if you watch like episodes 3, 4, 5, 6, it gets better from there. But once you get into the later kind of like, call it around episode, mid 40s or so, it'll get, it gets really a lot better. Like, they come into the plot a little bit more, characters are established, and even though we're not shooting for, award-winning TV here, at the same time, it's a lot more watchable. And I really got back to the, enjoyment of the show that I had when I watched it, in the mid-90s. Right. Versus being a lot more critical of it. I mean, I watched, Justice Ducks 1 and 2 for the critique, but at the same time, I just watched another, a little bit of different episodes, and I was like, this is what I'm getting back to. So definitely watch it.
Yeah, I will say this. We didn't really talk about the Negaverse today, but I think that was one of their stronger storylines because it's pretty cool. Just in a nutshell, real quick, since we're coming up on an hour. It's basically an inverse kind of nightmare version of Saint Canard. So it's sort of this other dimension where everything that's good in Saint Canard is evil in the Negaverse and vice versa. So they're like there's Drake Mallard's neighbors. I think they're the family called the Muddlefoots. They're like evil and really terrible in the Negaverse. Negaduck basically rules over.
Well, they're
the
kind of
Negaverse.
shitty in Saint Canard.
They're shitty in Saint Canard, but they're super evil in the Negaverse. And like Sean mentioned earlier in the show, something happens to Goslin in the Negaverse that's a little dark. And that changes a lot of things with Darkwing. He actually becomes sort of villainous for a while there. So it's interesting. Could it be murder? Let's kill him. So if you want to look for other episodes, which I recommend, just like these 2 guys, watch the first ones. Seek out any episodes with the Negaverse, because they do some interesting stuff in there. It's kind of like a fringe level kind of world jumping kind of thing that they have fun with. The convention of everything's kind of, it's like opposite day, so they have a lot of fun with that. But that's pretty much our discussion on Darkwing Duck today. I know a lot of you guys out there were looking forward to this one, remember it fondly as we do. I hope we didn't crush your childhood memories, but if we did, too bad, too late. So you guys have anything coming up in the next couple of weeks?
Oh man,
you got some shows?
Yeah, I've got some shows. You can check it out at WashingtonImprovTheater.com. The first show that I have in a series of 6 that are going to be going on during July and the early part of August is going to be on Saturday, July 12th at 10 p.m. We are doing improvised TED Talks, or a portion of an improvised TED Talk.
Right.
Yeah.
So not 45 minutes on stage? Okay.
It is not 45 minutes on stage, so it will be. So you can check it out, and you can buy tickets on WashingtonImprovTheater.com. I perform with a group that's called Nox, N-O-X, exclamation point.
Ooh, that's important. Okay, cool. Anything from you coming up, Matt? You got kind of a busy couple of days.
Yeah, I will be filling my days with a zip code relocation and the planning of a wedding, and then I'm going to be reviewing some various sandwiches that I'll be eating over the next few days.
Nice.
Exactly.
Nice.
So it can neither be disassembled nor whatever. But, that's kind of my life for the next 2 months. So, yeah.
Excellent.
Kill me.
Okay. No, don't do that. Then we got to replace you, and I don't want to do that. The only thing for me, I got nothing personal coming up, but our site, Collider.com, will be heading to Comic-Con in San Diego this year. Hopefully a lot of you guys who are listening either have gone or would like to go or would like to just know more about it. So when Comic-Con happens at the end of July, God, it's July already, make sure to head over to Collider.com and check out all the coverage. We'll have a ton of stuff from Hall H, everything in between, Ballroom 20, all that good stuff. So definitely check us out there.
Dave, can I expense my trip to Comic-Con to this show?
Absolutely. You can expense it.
Fantastic.
I will send it over to our non-existent accountant. We'll pay with all the podcast monies.
I just imagine you and Sean wheeling a wheelbarrow of money.
Yeah, I hope this is enough.
San Diego.
It's just full of Bitcoin.
Is this enough?
Is this enough to turn the lights back on?
It's Bitcoin that Dave purchased from the Silk Road
true
Bitcoin
story.
dispensary. Yeah,
Not a true story.
Nobody gives a shit about this.
I borrowed it from the Winklevoss.
So if you want to find more of us idiots, you can find us over at SaturdayMorningCartoons.com. That's morning with a U. You can also find us at our Tumblr page, SaturdayMorningCartoons.tumblr.com. You want to check us out on Twitter, it's at MorningTunes, again with a U. That's morning with a U, by the way, not tunes with a U, in case I've confused everyone.
I hope nobody knows how to spell.
It's probably like MOORING. It's like hitching your song to the.
Dave, you're confusing the dyslexics in our audience.
Well, so Helter, our buddy Helter, will have a tough time finding us. So that's most of our contact information. You can find me on Twitter at Dr. Claw MD. That's DrClawMD. Sean, where can we find you on the Instagrams and the tweets?
You can find me on Instagram and on Twitter at Sean Paul Ellis.
And Matt on Twitter?
On Twitter and Instagram at MattSF07.
Okay, and as I think we might have mentioned, there is the good old-fashioned American holiday of July 4th coming up this week. In honor of that Independence Day.
Oh, no.
Yeah, buddy, we will be taking on, and I don't think any of us have watched this because it's a relatively new show compared to what we've done. We're going to be taking on Liberty's Kids. I know nothing about this other than it's sort of educational and it's set during like the colonial American period. So
God, I hope it follows the children of like John Adams, Thomas Jefferson.
I'm pretty sure it does.
God. I'm pretty sure it's a Johnny Tremaine.
So yeah, I don't know. We're gonna find out with you guys. So if you guys out there are interested in listening to us, you can tune in next week after the 4th of July holiday and have yourself a very safe and enjoyable Independence Day, both to my co-hosts and to listeners out there. And we will.
I'm looking forward to crapping on history next week.
Oh boy, it's going to be a good one. It could be a pleasant surprise. We don't know. We'll find out. Until
the
next
NSA heard that, Sean.
Yeah,
fair enough.
We might not be here next week. So have a safe and happy 4th, and enjoy your weekend. And we will talk to you next time on Saturday Morning Cartoons. The history of the show, because it's got a little bit more meat on it than some of the shows that we normally talk about. So, Matt, do you want to give the listeners just a little bit of a flavor of what the show's about?
Absolutely. So the show that we are talking about, Darkwing Duck, was actually produced by Disney, and it was Disney Afternoon's first series that emphasized action rather than adventure. But basically, what it was Darkwing Duck was the main character who was a crime fighter. He had several, sidekicks and people who kind of, were part of the Justice Ducks, as we, kind of get ahead of ourselves there. But, the, unassuming, man by day, hero by night. His daytime name was Drake Mallard. He lived in St. Canard, but actually by night he was Darkwing Duck. And, was just your kind of standard classic Disney crime fighter.
Yeah, and it's interesting. There's a lot of kind of cool history here. Like Matt said, this was a Disney production, but when you watch it, it kind of has a feel of like an old Looney Tunes kind of slapstick, jokey humor, but also some of the Disney flavor to it as well. Chippendale Rescue Rangers, just a ton of stuff. And he basically came up with the idea for Darkwing Duck. Now, originally, as Wikipedia cites, he was kind of reluctant about how he wanted to spin this thing off. He didn't think it was going to have a lot of emotional impact, or he just felt like it was kind of a thin approximation or a thin adaptation. So originally he had a pitch that still, I believe, had Launchpad McQuack as the central character. It had Gizmo Duck showing up. Basically, that was all rejected. So he went back to the drawing board, and he went back to sort of the golden age of heroes and the golden age of comics, with characters like the Shadow and Doc Savage, and definitely a lot of Batman influence, which we'll talk about on this show, because Darkwing, the hero, takes a lot from the Shadow, takes a lot from Batman, and then his villains, which are my favorite part of the show, take a lot from the different rogues galleries. But basically, he went back to the drawing board. He stopped doing the sort of the James Bond idea, which was actually good because the 00 moniker is actually kind of owned by the James Bond, not company, but it's basically owned by them. So you can't really use it without getting sued. So it's a good thing that he dropped that. And then it turned.
So they couldn't use like 00 Duck.
So actually, it's kind of funny. There's an it was in afternoons. It was probably on some like Saturday mornings there for a while, but yeah, it was kind of just like always on. We do want to talk about.
And Dave, did you mention it was 91 episodes and it was over 3 seasons?
Yeah, over 3 seasons. And the IMDb breakdown was kind of weird because it was like they had like one run of seasons that was like 60 episodes, and then the other 2 were broken down into 15. So I don't quite know how that works out, and the dates didn't really match up either. But regardless, a year and a half, 90 episodes, and then they ran that in syndication for 5 more. The interesting story that kind of was behind this, we'll delve into the history a little bit more than we usually do, just to start this off. So, like I said, it started off as a spin-off from the DuckTales series. Now, there was one particular episode of DuckTales called 00 Duck, and that starred Launchpad McQuack, who we'll see quite often in this new series. Starred him as a secret agent. So that was just kind of a one-off from DuckTales. He was a secret agent. The powers that be over at Disney decided they liked that idea, and they wanted to develop a spin-off series with that kind of premise in mind. So a fellow by the name of Tad Stones, who had been working with the Disney Animation in the television department since, I believe, 1984, since its inception. He was there kind of from the beginning, and he's worked on a ton of stuff. The Aladdin series, DuckTales. Hello, and welcome to Saturday Morning Cartoons, the weekly podcast that revisits, reviews, and ridicules some of the world's weirdest animated series. I'll be your host, Dave Trumbore. That flapping sound you hear in the background is the terror that flaps in the night, known as Sean Paul Ellis. What's going on over there, bud?
David, how are you doing?
Oh, you're making some strange noises to start the show. That's good stuff.
I'm excited.
Well, I am too. Let's get into it. And he is the jailer that throws away the key? Matt Barron, joining us from San Francisco. What's up, buddy?
I don't know how to feel about that intro, but you know what, I'll take it.
You know what? So we're obviously talking about Darkwing Duck today, and he's a character that's kind of known for his catchphrase, which was, "I am the terror that flaps in the night," and then he comes up with just some terrible follow-up that's usually like a pun on whatever the current situation is, but getting very far ahead of myself. So that'll be the show we're talking about today. We're going to switch things up just a little bit here. We're actually going to talk about what the series kind of is overall first, and then we'll delve into since this one actually wasn't just a completely it had origins in another series. Let's put it that way. It was an original creation, but it had its origins in another series. So actually, DuckTales ran before this, and there were a few characters that were ported over for this kind of spin-off series. And the world of Duckburg, which is the city in DuckTales, and St. Canard, which is the city in Darkwing Duck, they apparently kind of exist in the same world. So this originally ran from only 91 to 92, and they cranked out 91 episodes, I believe, in that time. And as as we've talked about on this show, that's just like an enormous output. I don't know how exactly they do it, but it was basically like it ran for almost like one a day. So it was like a Monday through Friday show for a while. So I mean, if you think about it, it really was only on for about a year and a half. The original episodes, and then it ran in syndication until 1995. So it was on for 4 or 5 years, but it was really only those 90 episodes that were produced. So that's pretty crazy.
Which blows my mind because, when I was a kid watching the show, I probably watched it in syndication in like the mid-90s, but I just feel like it was on TV forever.
Yeah, and it pretty much was. 5 years, half a decade when you're in the mid-90s, that does seem like it's just kind of on forever. And it got jumbled around,